thank you very much, Sally, and just what you were saying in terms about the contribution of foreign students to the higher education institutions. I was just reflecting on the fact that one of the things I've increasingly found in international contexts is people are coming up to me and saying, my kids can't get into a British university or higher education, you know, what can I do? And on that individual level, the only thing I can say is, well, there's Canada or Australia or maybe Germany. You know, Britain is making this really difficult, and for your individual problem, you know, and that's a loss to Britain, a loss to your members, a loss to your institutions, and a loss to all of us, that students are going elsewhere. Okay, any particular questions for those who weren't here at the start? Sally sadly has to dash off, so just if you have any particular questions for Sally, now is the time to ask them. Or not, as the case may be. She might get a little more time to, oh, there we are, we have one there. Can we get the, we'll just use a microphone to make sure everyone can hear. So we'll just get the microphone kindly being run around. Cheers, thanks Sue.
What was the question?
Red t-shirt.
Hello?
Yeah, it's all sorted. We have a lovely tech man over there who's making it all work.
Thank you. My name's Julia Charlton and I'm a member of UCU. And like quite a high proportion of my colleagues in higher education, I'm an immigrant. And I'm in the fortunate position I don't have to have a visa, but quite a few of our colleagues do, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to recruit staff, not just students, but also a significant expense for those staff when they have to renew their visas, something in the region of £1,200 after 3 years. And the universities don't subsidise that. They may subsidise it as part of their initial relocation package, but not for renewal. And of course, we value these people. If they're here doing a PhD, then they're probably not going to complete it in 3 years if they're working. There's going to be at least one renewal. And as a member said to me recently, why should I pay to be employed? And I wondered what, if anything, UCU might be able to do about that. Thank you.
Very quickly, coming back on that, one of the arguments that we have been having consistently has been how, for starters, international students coming in to study within the UK are recorded against government statistics, and whether they should or should not be included in the figures that are regularly touted around. It's the same argument that has to be placed in terms of staff. Any barrier that is put up that makes it more difficult for us in our profession, and I would suggest in any profession, to have the right person able to come in and do the job, is something that we as trade unionists must oppose. In terms of what UCU has been doing, we have been regularly, as I say, making those arguments with the BIS Select Committee on behalf of students, and that's something that we have actually extended in terms of staffing arrangements, because we know, as I said within my introduction, that education post-16 is not something that is limited by barriers that are national. It's not something that is based even on a regional level within our country. You will find that you have universities collaborating with people throughout the world and institutions throughout the world. We have got universities that have satellite campuses throughout the world. We have FE colleges now that regularly bring in students from around the world, and it's something that this government has got to face up to. If you want to have what I consider to be a racist argument that you are deliberately trying to put into people's minds, which is those coming into this country from abroad are a burden, are something that you have to be frightened of, because that's really what this government is about. That has to be argued out, because we in education have to deal with that on a society basis anyway. But on our industrial level, our universities and our colleges, as I said, would cease to function. So what the government is pushing is something that's going to actively undermine one of its most successful sectors internationally, and that's something that we have to challenge, and we do.
If I can just actually, Julia, respond to you with a question, which is there a campaign, a petition? I mean, it strikes me as as Sally said, many of these people will be students as well as staff. You know, whether it's something possible to work with the NUS, whether there's been any work done in that area. Just a question, if you know. Right, okay, I'm going to go. Right, okay. Well, let's have a chat later and see what we might be able to do about that. Okay, any other questions for Sally? Yep, in the centre row here.
Can I just say that I didn't expect you to be here, Natalie, and my daughter and her student friends will be absolutely thrilled because they are huge supporters of you. So wait till I get back to tell them. I work for the NHS, and it's absolutely startling how when it suits them, then they go and encourage all the nurses to come from Spain and Philippines and whatever, and then they will spend enormous amounts trying to get these workers to come because we're not training enough. And these workers come with, I think there are a lot of pressures, but they do keep our NHS going. Without them, we'd be stuffed, quite honestly. And we just need to be sure that we support them when they come, and that they're not part of this sort of feeling that they're immigrants and they're another lot. And so we'd just like to just say that in the NHS we really support them. Do have a few concerns about us taking so many workers from countries who need them, and that is a constant kind of worry. But nevertheless, we certainly are working in Bristol, and we've recruited about 30 Spanish and Philippine nurses.
What I think is interesting, though, about this is that you're having exactly the same issues in health as we have in education, and there is, I think, a real debate that has to be had around what is happening in terms of brain drain from other countries, both within health and other sectors, certainly our own. But I do think, though, that the interesting point for me on this is that there is now the debate that you have to be earning a certain level in order for you to actually stay in the country. Now, actually, if our NHS, which is, I have to say, not known for paying its essential workers what I would consider to be a reasonable living wage, is dependent on those people coming from overseas, this government has got a problem. And it's something that is not going to go away. It's something that's going to be coming down the tracks very rapidly. In fact, it's already here. But I suspect you must be dealing with the issues that you've described in exactly the same way that my union is, which is that we say that those coming into our sector have to have a credible job, have to have equal rights to those who are working here. And now what we're having to do is flip that argument, because as I said, we are finding that we have satellite campuses springing up under the auspices of universities in particular in this country overseas. And what we're finding is that those people in those campuses or those employers are not being given the terms and conditions that their British colleagues would expect. So there is a move from employers to utilise the fact that being outside, and it is outside of the EU, they can undermine terms and conditions and actually start delivering education on the cheap. I go back to what I said. The debate around the EU for us has to be about workers' rights and international solidarity. Those are the questions we have to have, and in each sector there will be stories and there will be issues, but the fundamentals are, does that help us or does that not? If it doesn't, can it be improved, and if so, how? If it does, why is it this government's looking to undermine it, and what should we do in the face of that?
Well said. If I can just add on the brain drain point, because it's something I think is really critical, particularly on the NHS side of things. There is a global shortage of healthcare workers. Now, Philippines, for example, is a special case because they train people for export, and there you can really ask the question about nurses, and very often they're women with families who are forced to travel on their own, leaving children behind, and there's issues there. But the whole issue of brain drain. We should be training absolutely at least as much medical workers as we need, and probably you could argue we should be training more, given that we should have the capacity to be able to do that, to help out countries who are really struggling. So I think that's a very good point. Any other questions for Sally? A gentleman in the middle.
Thanks. Thanks, Sally, for her contribution. It kind of like with one position on it. Lots of thoughts, lots of questions, but not really any straight answers yet, which is fair. That's not a criticism. I think the point you make about UCU not going to tell its members how to vote, to a certain extent reflects the experience we had in Scotland around the referendum, when most of the trade unions actually didn't tell people how to vote in the Scottish referendum. But we were concerned that the tone of the debate was going to be pitched between two forms of nationalism, Scottish nationalism versus British nationalism, and therefore we didn't just sit on the sidelines, we actually engaged in a proper examination of the kind of Scotland we wanted. So we ended up coming up with ideas about fairer Scotland, more just Scotland, more equal Scotland, and so on and so forth. And we, I think, without any conceit, I think we effectively shifted the tone of the debate and the nature of the debate. And I think that's one of the things we need to do here in this debate about Europe, is to try and ensure that the debate is not a debate between David Cameron's vision either of Europe or out of Europe, or Nigel Farage's or anybody else. We need to have that kind of debate about the kind of social Europe, or indeed social Britain, which might be a good idea. But I'm interested in to think about how we can actually achieve that, given that the debate in Europe has been dominated by essentially the right wing for so long that our voice has been lost in it.
Well, it's interesting what you say about Scotland, because what we did within UCU, as I say, we didn't in the Scotland referendum either tell our members yes, no, in, out. What we did do is publish a list, a manifesto of what UCU believes Scottish university, because that's who we represented Scotland, what Scottish university education should be, and use that as a basis for all those politicians who were arguing either way to have to account for what they were arguing being better or not, set against what our members were asking of the union to promote on their behalf. I see no difference with what we have to do here. What we have to do, though, is look at what we have in terms of the structures of the EU and pose the questions: are they delivering for working people or not? And that's very easy for us to do. What we mustn't do, I think, because this isn't a short decision, this isn't something that we change in 2 years' time, this is something that's going to impact decades and decades and decades on. So what we have to do is develop a vision of what we want working people to have over that period of time. Now that for me isn't just about industrial issues, that for me includes how best do we have a structure within Europe that promotes peace. That for me is about a debate that says how best do we look at how we ensure that the political and geographical schisms that are going to take place over the next decades are ones that we as working people representatives have structures that can deal with that. So for example, water. That's not a small thing. So for example, fossil fuels. Not a small thing. So for example, how are we going to have health systems for an ageing population and a reducing level of young people across Europe, and at the same time deal with the way that immigration and the way that isn't being managed by the European Union can then become a long-term strategy. Now, the argument that has to start from, is that better dealt with on a nation-by-nation basis? And that's a legitimate argument, and it's one we have to look at, because localism, in the face of globalisation, I think has some real positives in terms of the control that working people can bring to bear on their working environment and in their society. But also alongside that, we then have to pose, is it safer, is it better, is it more prosperous if we pool our resources? And the question then is, does the national barrier go up, and does that work, or does the national barrier go down? And I'm just posing questions at the moment, because I think, as you say, we've got to get out of this. David Cameron is doing a tour of Europe and bristling because he can't get someone else to sit alongside him and say, well, you don't have to take more people in terms of immigration, because that's really what it's about. And you aren't going to be able to have special rules to protect bankers in the way that you want. It's much bigger than that. And my concern at the moment is that the debate isn't one that's really looking over the lifetime of the people that we represent and their kids. But that's actually what's at stake here, and that's serious stuff.
Okay, Sally has got to go. It has really got to go now. So
having asked lots of questions and not given the answers.
great point to leave. So I think if we can just say to Sally, thank you very much for being here and for coming.
When she does ask, is asked where people should go to university, shouldn't say Canada, should say.
well, they're not going to. They're not going to get in. That's the problem. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay.